The crowd hushed the moment I pushed open the heavy courtroom doors. You could almost hear the whisper of surprise sweep through the room, like a storm beginning to stir. My crutches struck the polished Denver floor with hollow, echoing clacks, each sound a reminder of every painful step that had brought me here. My heart was racing so loudly I could barely hear the shuffle of chairs, but I could feel every stare fixed on me. I'm Grace Harper, 28 years old, and I will never forget that moment. My family sat lined up like a row of smug statues in the front seats, convinced the fight was already over, confident that I was gone, erased, defeated. But when they saw me, alive, walking, standing tall despite the agony burning through my injured leg, their self-satisfied smiles cracked. My father's jaw dropped open, his eyes went wide. Then he saw the woman beside me and jumped to his feet, his voice trembling as he shouted, "Oh my God, it's her!" The entire room froze. The sound of his outburst sliced through the silence like glass. For a second, nobody moved. Not the judge, not the jury, not even the lawyers. My father's face turned pale as if he'd seen a ghost. They all believed I'd never make it out of that hospital bed, that I was broken forever after what happened. They thought they had buried both me and my future when they left me comatose and alone. They assumed my career was dead, that the $10 million contract I had earned through years of sweat, sleepless coding nights, and unshakable faith in my work would be theirs to claim. But they were wrong, so very wrong. If it had been you, what would you have done? Would you have made them pay for what they did, or given them a chance to make it right? Think about it. Let's talk. Because this story, my story, didn't begin in the courtroom. It started months before that fateful day. It all began under the brilliant Denver sun as I stepped out of a glass office tower, trembling with excitement. My hands gripped a folder containing the signed deal, a $10 million contract for my AI-powered medical diagnostic algorithm. My invention was set to change the healthcare industry forever. After years of burning the midnight oil, debugging lines of code until my eyes blurred, and pushing through every doubt that ever whispered I wasn't good enough, I had finally done it. I was at the top of my career, a 28-year-old software engineer who had just broken into the big league. The moment was so sweet I could hardly believe it was real. I drove home, my heart light, picturing my parents' pride and my older sister's happy disbelief. I could already hear Mom's laugh, already see Dad's approving nod. Our family home stood peacefully on a quiet suburban street, the place where I thought love still lived. When I stepped into the kitchen, though, the air felt cold. My sister, perfectly dressed as always, sat at the table, her arms crossed. At 32, she was a senior project manager at the same company, known for her calm authority and polished charm. But that afternoon, her smile was gone. Something sharp glinted in her eyes. "I did it," I said, holding up the contract like a trophy. $10 million for my algorithm. Her mouth curled, not in pride, but bitterness. "Your algorithm?" she sneered. "You mean the one I guided, managed, and pushed through meetings? The one my team helped polish?" Her words dripped with venom. I froze, stunned. I'd always known she was competitive. She'd always been the golden child, Mom's favorite, Dad's pride. But now, there was something much darker behind her stare. "It's my code," I said slowly, my hands trembling. "My years of work." She rose suddenly, her chair screeching across the floor. "You think you're better than me, don't you, Grace?" she hissed, taking a step closer. I backed toward the stairs, trying to calm her, begging her to listen. "This isn't about you," I whispered. But it was too late. We were standing at the top of the staircase, our tempers boiling, the air tense, heavy, dangerous. Her face was inches from mine, her breath shaking with rage. "You're nothing without me," she spat. Then, in a flash, her hand struck my shoulders. Time slowed. I remember the dizzy twist of my body, the crack of pain as my head hit the wooden steps, the blinding swirl of motion, and finally, darkness. When I woke, the world was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines. I was in a hospital bed, my body battered, my leg bandaged, my mind foggy. "You're awake?" a nurse asked softly, surprise coloring her voice. I blinked, every word slow and heavy. "How long?" 2 weeks, she said gently. You've been in a coma. I stared at the ceiling, struggling to process it. My family. Have they been here? Her hesitation told me everything before she spoke. No, dear. Your parents called the hospital once, but they haven't come. My throat tightened. I could understand my sister avoiding me. Guilt does that to a person. But my parents? I'd always hoped they loved me enough to care. Did they? Say anything? I asked quietly. The nurse looked at the floor. They said you brought this on yourself, that you embarrassed them. The words hit harder than the fall. Shame. From my own parents. I stared at the ceiling again, tears slipping down my cheeks. The people who should have protected me had turned their backs without a second thought. Days crept by in that hospital cage. The sterile white walls closed around me. No calls, no visits. Only the nurses going about their routines, and me, left alone with my thoughts and my aching heart. I kept imagining the front door at home, waiting for it to open, waiting for someone to walk in. No one did. Then, one morning, the door finally swung open. But it wasn't comfort that came in. My sister stood there, arms crossed, dressed perfectly as if nothing had happened. Her eyes swept over me with disdain. Still clinging to life, huh? She said with a cold smile. You're holding everyone back, you know. Pain flared through my leg as I pushed myself up on my elbows. Why are you here? She leaned in, voice low and mocking. Just making sure you stay out of my way. Then she turned, her shoes clicking down the hallway as she vanished again, leaving me trembling with fury. Her visit wasn't random. It was a warning. And it wasn't just cruelty. There was calculation in her tone. Something bigger was happening. A few days later, my best friend, my only real ally, managed to visit. Her face was drawn, her eyes tired. She hugged me carefully, whispering, I've been trying to see you for days. They wouldn't let anyone in. I felt a wave of relief at her presence, until she looked at me seriously and said, Grace, your sister's been saying at work that the algorithm is hers, that she created it, that she's taking over your $10 million contract. The words punched the air from my lungs. My project, my legacy, was being stolen while I lay trapped in a hospital bed. That night, I tried to check my bank account to pay my growing medical bills, but the app flashed a red warning. Account frozen. My hands shook as I called the bank. Court order, the agent said flatly. Filed on claims of your incapacity. My mind reeled. Someone had declared me unfit to manage my finances. The pieces clicked together. My sister's smug visit, her confidence, her takeover at work. She wasn't just jealous. She was orchestrating a theft. Not long after, a man in a dark suit entered my room, a lawyer. His face was calm, professional, but his eyes held gravity. He set a thick folder on my lap. Ms. Harper, he began quietly, I'm representing your interests regarding your contract. He slid a few sheets toward me. These files show that someone has filed to transfer ownership of your $10 million deal. The documents include signatures authorizing the transfer, including yours. I stared at the signature, my own name forged in careful strokes I'd never written. My pulse pounded in my ears. My sister, I whispered, everything coming into focus. The betrayal, the lies, the silence. He nodded slowly. Someone's trying to take everything. I gripped the papers so tight they crinkled between my fingers. My sister's smirk from her hospital visit flashed through my mind. This had her name all over it. I asked my lawyer how he'd found me. He explained that a colleague at my company, worried about my absence, had hired him to investigate. The court order freezing your bank account was just the start, he said, flipping to another page. These documents claim you're unfit to work based on your medical records. I stared at him, disbelief turning to dread. My medical records? I'd barely been awake a week, and someone was already rewriting my story. My lawyer leaned forward, his voice low. We need to dig deeper, but this looks deliberate. I nodded, my anger rising. My sister wasn't just stealing my contract. She was trying to erase my competence, my identity. That afternoon, a doctor came to see me. She was in her 40s, her face kind but resolute, and she introduced herself as the one who'd overseen my care. "I found something troubling," she said, pulling up my cart on a tablet. "Your medical records were altered after you were admitted." My breath caught. She pointed to entries showing extended sedation and exaggerated neurological issues, none of which matched my recovery. "Someone added these to make it look like you'd never wake up," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "It's why the court order went through so fast." I felt a chill. This wasn't just about money. It was about keeping me out of the picture permanently. As I lay there, the pieces started to connect. My sister had always been controlling ever since we were kids. I remembered her at 6 snatching my favorite doll and claiming it as hers, smirking as our parents praised her for being assertive. By 10, she'd mastered turning their attention away from me, convincing them I was the problem whenever I spoke up. As teenagers, she'd manipulate every family decision from vacation plans to who got the bigger room, always painting me as the selfish one. My parents never questioned her. They adored her confidence, her charm. I'd spent years trying to prove myself, building my AI algorithm to show I was more than her shadow. But now she'd taken it to a new level, orchestrating a plan to strip me of everything I'd earned. I looked at my lawyer, then at the doctor, their faces steady with determination. They believed in me even when my own family didn't. The forged documents, the altered records, it was all my sister's doing with my parents, likely turning a blind eye as always. I thought of her boasts at work, her cruel words in the hospital. She thought she'd won that I'd stay broken, but she'd underestimated me. I handed the papers back to my lawyer, my voice firm. "We're fighting this," I said. He nodded, a spark in his eyes. The doctor promised to document every discrepancy in my records. I wasn't just fighting for my contract. I was fighting for my life. Determined to fight back, I took a bold step. Still weak but fueled by anger, I checked out of the hospital against advice and arranged to meet my sister at a quiet Denver cafe. I tucked a small recorder in my pocket, my heart pounding as I limped through the door. She was already there, sipping coffee, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. "You're up," she said, her tone mocking. "Didn't think you'd make it." I forced a smile, playing along, and asked about work. She leaned back, smirking. "The contract's moving forward," she said. "Someone had to step up since you're indisposed." I pressed her, keeping my voice casual. "You mean my contract?" Her laugh was cold. "It's mine now. You weren't going to make it happen from a hospital bed." I clenched my jaw, the recorder capturing every word. She just admitted her plan to steal my $10 million deal. Back in my temporary apartment, I met with a private investigator my lawyer had recommended. She was a woman in her late 30s, sharp and no-nonsense with a knack for uncovering secrets. "I've been digging into your sister's finances," she said, spreading bank statements across the table. My breath caught as she pointed to a series of payments, large sums wired to a colleague at my company. "This man," she said, tapping a nummy, "received $10,000 from your sister's account." I recognized the name, a colleague who'd always been too eager to please her. "He's been forging company documents," shedded, "making it look like your sister was the lead on your algorithm." My blood boiled. She wasn't just taking credit. She was paying to rewrite history. Later that day, my best friend called, her voice urgent. "I found something you need to see," she said, forwarding a chain of internal company emails. I opened them, my eyes scanning the screen. In one, my sister had written to our boss, "With Grace out, I'm stepping in to replace her. The contract's in good hands." Another email bragged about her vision for the algorithm as if I'd never existed. My hands shook as I read her words, each one a betrayal. Cynthia's voice broke through my thoughts. "She's been planning this for weeks," she said. "Everyone at work thinks she's the hero." I thanked her, my resolve hardening. These emails were proof that my sister was trying to erase me from my own success. Determined to leave no stone unturned, I called the hospital's administration office. I'd been haunted by the doctor's warning about my altered medical records, and I needed answers. The administrator, a brisk woman, confirmed my suspicions after pulling my file. "There's evidence of unauthorized changes," she said, her voice tight. "Entries were added to exaggerate your condition, suggesting you'd be incapacitated for months." I asked who'd access to my records. She hesitated, then admitted, "Only a few staff members, but we're investigating an external request that came through a legal channel." My mind flashed to my sister's connections, her ability to manipulate. This wasn't just about the contract. It was about keeping me down, locked away in a false narrative of frailty. With evidence in hand, I prepared for battle. I sat across from my lawyer in his Denver office, a cluttered space filled with legal books and case files. "We're building a strong case," he said, his voice steady. "We'll file a lawsuit in Denver court charging fraud and conspiracy to deprive you of your contract." I knotted my fingers, tracing the edge of the table, but my chest tightened. Going to court meant facing my family, the people who'd betrayed me without a second thought. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "The recording is key," he said. "In Colorado, one-party consentee is legal, so your cafe conversation with your sister is admissible." I exhaled, relieved that my risky move would hold up in court. He explained we'd present the recording alongside the emails my best friend had uncovered showing my sister's intent to steal my $10 million deal. "We'll also call the doctor who reviewed your medical records," headed. "Her testimony will prove the alterations were deliberate." I felt a surge of hope, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on me. This wasn't just about winning. It was about confronting the family I'd once trusted. Later that day, I met with a doctor in a hospital conference room. She sat across from me, her posture calm, but her expression serious. "I've prepared a detailed statement," she said, sliding a folder my way. "It confirms the unauthorized changes to your records entries added to exaggerate your coma and suggest permanent incapacity." I flipped through her notes, my heart racing. The evidence was clear. Someone had tried to paint me as helpless to justify stripping me of my rights. Dr. Price met my gaze. "I'll testify to every discrepancy," she said firmly. This wasn't an accident. Her words bolstered my resolve, but they also stirred a storm of emotions I'd buried deep. As I left the hospital, memories of my family's favoritism flooded back. I saw my sister at family dinners, always the center of attention. Her stories earning my parents' smiles while my achievements went unnoticed. I remembered the time I'd won a science fair at 15 only for my mother to praise me sister's art project instead. My father would nod along, dismissing my efforts as not practical. Their constant preference for her had pushed me to work harder to build my algorithm to prove I was enough. Now they'd sided with her again, letting her manipulate my life while I fought to survive. The pain of their rejection hit me like a wave, threatening to drown my courage. I stopped at a park near the courthouse, needing air. I sat on a bench, the cold biting through my coat, and let myself feel the hurt. I wasn't just fighting for my contract. I was fighting for the truth, for the years I'd spent proving myself. The day of the trial arrived and I was ready. The Denver courtroom buzzed with tension as I sat beside my lawyer, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Daniel stood, his voice clear and commanding, addressing the judge. "We have undeniable evidence of a conspiracy to defraud my client." He began presenting the recording from the cafe where my sister admitted to stealing my $10 million contract. The audio played, her smug voice echoing through the room. "It's mine now." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Daniel followed with the forged company documents showing how my sister and a colleague had falsified records to claim my algorithm. I glanced at her across the room, her face pale but defiant. Next, Daniel introduced the bank statements revealing payments my sister had made to Mark, a colleague who sat rigid in his seat. "This transactions prove collusion." Daniel said, his tone unwavering. He handed the judge a folder of emails my best friend had uncovered, where my sister bragged about replacing me. The evidence was airtight, each piece stacking against her. Then the doctor took the stand. Dr. Price spoke calmly, her words precise. "The medical records were altered to exaggerate Ms. Harper's condition," she said, holding up charts. False entries suggested permanent incapacity used to justify the court order against her. The judge's eyes narrowed and I felt a spark of hope. The truth was unraveling. My sister stood to defend herself, her voice sharp but unsteady. "I was protecting the company." She claimed, her eyes darting to the judge. Grace was unstable, unfit to lead. Hurley stung, but they crumbled under scrutiny. Mark followed, stammering through his defense. "I was just following orders," he said, avoiding my gaze. His weak excuse only deepened the judge's frown. I watched my parents in the gallery, their faces a mix of shock and denial. My mother clutched my father's arm, her lips trembling. My father stared ahead, his usual cold demeanor cracking. They'd enabled my sister for years, but now their complicity was laid bare. Daniel called me to testify. My heart pounded as I took the stand facing the room. I spoke of my algorithm, the years of work I'd poured into it, and the betrayal of being pushed down the stairs. I described waking in the hospital, abandoned by my family, and discovering their plot to strip me of everything. They thought I'd stay silent. I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest, but I'm here for justice. The courtroom was silent, the weight of my words sinking in. My sister glared, her confidence fading. My parents looked away, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time, I felt the power shift. The judge deliberated, the minutes stretching like hours. Finally, she delivered her verdict. "The evidence is overwhelming," she said, her voice firm. "The defendant orchestrated a calculated scheme to defraud Miss Harper of her intellectual property and financial rights." She sentenced my sister to 4 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy. Mark received 2 years for his role in forging documents. I exhaled relief washing over me, but the judge wasn't done. As for the parents, she continued their involvement in enabling the scheme warrants a civil lawsuit for damages. My mother gasped, burying her face in her hands. My father's shoulders slumped, his authority shattered. As the gavel struck, I felt a weight lift. The courtroom emptied, but I stayed watching my family leave in disgrace. My sister's defiant mask had cracked her eyes hollow. Mark shuffled out, head bowed. My parents, once so dismissive, now faced the consequences of their favoritism. I'd fought for my truth, and I'd won. The contract was mine again, my name restored. But more than that, I'd reclaimed my strength. I walked out of the courthouse, the Denver sky bright above me, ready to rebuild my life. With justice served, I began a new chapter. It stood in my new apartment, a small but bright space with windows overlooking the city skyline. The walls were bare, but they held promise. A fresh start, free from the shadows of my family's betrayal. I'd made the decision to cut all ties with them. No more calls, no more visits, no more hoping for their approval. My sister, my parents. They were part of a past I no longer needed. The freedom of that choice felt like breathing for the first time in years. The legal consequences had been severe. My sister was serving a 4-year prison sentence. Her ambition reduced to a cell. The court ordered her to pay me $200,000 in restitution for the damages she'd caused. Mark, a colleague who'd been her pawn, faced 2 years behind bars and a $20,000 fine for his role in forging documents. My parents, complicit in their silence, were hit with a civil judgment ordered to pay $75,000 in damages. Their reputation in our community crumbled, their once proud status eroded by their own choices. I didn't gloat. I felt no joy in their downfall, but I felt relief knowing they could no longer hurt me. I wanted to do more than rebuild my own life. The pain of being betrayed, of being left alone in a hospital bed, had shown me how many others might face similar struggles. I took a bold step, investing $500,000 from my contract earnings into a Denver-based foundation for victims of familial abuse. The fund would provide legal aid, counseling, and safe housing for those escaping toxic families. At the launch event, I spoke to a small crowd, my voice steady. No one should feel alone in their fight. I said the words carrying my own scars. The foundation was my way of turning pain into purpose, ensuring others had the support I'd lacked. As I settled into my new home, I reflected on the journey. My family had tried to erase me, my sister with her schemes, my parents with their indifference. But their actions only made me stronger. I'd fought through a coma, uncovered their lies, and faced them in court. Each step had been a battle, from recording my sister's confession to presenting evidence with my lawyer. I'd learned that justice wasn't just about winning. It was about standing up, even when the odds seemed impossible. My algorithm, my pride was back in my hands, and I was already planning its next phase, determined to make it bigger than ever. The biggest lesson wasn't about revenge or triumph. It was about self-reliance. For years, I'd sought my family's validation, chasing their love through achievements they ignored. But in that hospital bed, abandoned and betrayed, I found something better. My own strength. I didn't need their approval to know my worth. Chiantry had carried me through the pain, the lies, and the courtroom. It had taught me that no one could take my future unless I let them. As I looked out over Denver, the city lights sparkling below, I knew I was enough. I was ready to build a life on my terms, one where no one could hold me back.